We all know that the month of July revolved around Black Sabbath's farewell from the stage and the death of Ozzy Osbourne that followed. And yeah, both were massive moments in metal history. But there was one more event that slipped through the chaos, almost unnoticed. This year marks the 60th anniversary of the German legends, Scorpions, the iconic band led by Rudolf Schenker and Klaus Meine. They've completed 6 full decades of relentless music and releases, building one of the most successful and influential careers in the history of hard rock and heavy metal. Their 1970s albums with Uli Jon Roth helped lay the foundations of heavy metal itself. And their explosive rise in the 80s catapulted them to global fame and rock stardom. Sure, the albums that came after were met with mixed reviews, but in 2022, they dropped a final bomb, a record that reminded the world just how legendary this band truly is. So, as always, drop a comment and tell me, what was the first Scorpion song you ever heard? Welcome to my updated deep dive into the story of Scorpions. As I said at the beginning of the video, the story of Scorpions began exactly 60 years ago in the German city of Hanover. The band was formed by Rudolf Schenker, who took on the role of guitarist and singer. He was joined by 2 other teenagers, Lothar Heimberg and Karl-Heinz Vollmer. But of course, this was the 1960s, and that first version of the band, then called the Scorpions, played a kind of pop rock heavily inspired by the early Beatles sound. In reality, the project didn't start to take shape until 1969, when Rudolf's younger brother grew old enough to become the second guitarist. His name was Michael Schenker. Around that same time, the singer who would change everything also joined, Klaus Meine, with this more stable lineup. The band dropped it from their name and began leaning into the psychedelic sound that was popular in the late 60s and early 70s. They spent the next 2 years gigging around until they won a music contest that allowed them to record the song's action, And I'm Going Mad, that led to a record deal with Brain, a German label that specialized in krautrock. That is, the German take on progressive rock. In just 1 week, Scorpions recorded their first album, a psychedelic gem quite different from the sound they'd later become known for. That 1972 album was Lonesome Crow. During the recording of this strange and fascinating work, drummer Wolfgang Ziony joined the ranks, and with him, they set out on a tour across their homeland, Germany. On that tour, Scorpions shared the stage with rising British force, a band called UFO. And at the end of the tour, in a move oh so British, UFO offered Michael Schenker the position of lead guitarist. Michael barely hesitated and left Scorpions to join the English band, carving out a name for himself among them. But before leaving, he told his brother to bring in another guitarist, a young shredder named Uli Jon Roth, to finish the tour. Uli stepped in and carried the band through their final shows. But when the tour was over, Rudolf made the call. Scorpions would be no more. Alright, not exactly, but something strange did happen. Rudolf had a change of heart and decided to bring the band back, but only if Uli Jon Roth was on board. The problem? Uli turned him down, choosing instead to keep playing with his own group, Dawn Road. So Rudolf showed up at one of their rehearsals and offered himself as the second guitarist. That lineup also featured bassist Francis Buchholz and drummer Jürgen Rosenthal. Over time, Rudolf worked his charm, winning the others over, until eventually, everyone agreed that singer Klaus Meine should join as well. And then in a bold twist, they ditched the name Dawn Road and claimed the name Scorpions as their own, with that audacious act of identity takeover. The first true classic era of Scorpions was born, with Uli Jon Roth as a master of the 6 strings. That new incarnation of Scorpions quickly landed a record deal with RCA to create their second official album, the now legendary Fly to the Rainbow. While the band still carried that semi-psychedelic, semi-hippie vibe in tracks like the title cut Fly to the Rainbow or the hard-hitting Speeds Coming, they were now starting to carve out the sound that would define them. Hard rock built on tight, driving riffs, fast drumming, and the virtuosic solos of Uli Jon Roth. But just before the tour began, fate struck. Drummer Jürgen was drafted into the army and had to be replaced. His spot was taken by Belgian powerhouse Rudy Lenners. With him, in 1975, they teamed up for the first time with producer Dieter Dierks and recorded the iconic album In Trance. Here, they dove even deeper into that hard rock formula, one that was now brushing right up against heavy metal, with tracks like In Trance, Dark Lady, and The Lightning Fast Robot Man. It was also, interestingly enough, the first album cover to feature the now classic Scorpions logo, and the first to stir up a bit of controversy for its provocative imagery. They had no idea what was coming next. I won't get ahead of myself, but the album was a clear step up in success. Not only did it cement their status as rock stars in Germany, it also began to put their name on the map across the rest of Europe. However, Scorpions would soon become even more infamous, not for their music, but for the storm of controversy surrounding the cover of their next release. Once again with the same lineup and producer Dieter Dierks, they unleashed the now classic Virgin Killer. Yes, Virgin Killer had some solid tracks, but its rapid spread came almost entirely from that infamous original cover. I'll show as much of here on YouTube as I can, obviously censored, because it was basically a preteen girl unclothed with a cracked glass effect covering a certain area. Yeah, not cool at all, and definitely the kind of thing that would get you canceled today. That cover lasted only a couple of weeks in stores before complaints piled up, forcing a quick replacement. The problem? The new cover, honestly, they could have tried a little harder. The photo looked terrible, especially the awkward poses of the bassist and drummer. Maybe it was that whole awkward vibe, but soon after, the drummer quit. He was replaced by what many consider the most iconic drummer in Scorpions history, the great Herman Rarebell. In the end, Virgin Killer was remembered far more for its scandalous artwork than for the music itself. But the next record, that one truly put Scorpions on a map as pioneers of heavy metal outside the English-speaking world. That record, for me, the ultimate with Uli Jon Roth, was a legendary 1977 masterpiece, Taken by Force. On Taken by Force, Scorpions definitely found a middle ground between hard rock and heavy metal. Uli Jon Roth unleashed his full potential, showing off his clear neoclassical influences, especially on killer tracks like Polar Nights, He's a Woman, She's a Man, and The Sails of Sharon. Seriously, just looking at that track list, you can tell how brutal this album really is. But despite the album's raw power and brilliance, Uli began feeling the band was heading toward a more commercial sound, and started planning his exit from Scorpions. Still, he went with them to Japan, the Old Faithful, where they recorded their first live album, which was a huge success in the land of the rising sun. That album was Tokyo Tapes, released in '78. After that powerful live performance, Uli Jon Roth said goodbyes to Scorpions, and the guitarist who replaced it would go on to define their next great decade of success. Rod's departure didn't slow the band down one bit. In fact, they immediately started auditioning guitarists, and out of 140 candidates, the seasoned Matthias Jabs was chosen. With him, they began recording their next album in 1978. But guess what? At that very moment, Michael Schenker quit UFO and came crawling back, tail between his legs, begging his brother to let him rejoin Scorpions for the sake of family. Nah, just kidding. Michael actually rejoined because Rudolph thought it was awesome to have three guitarists recording the album. With that incredible trio, Rudolph, Michael Schenker, and Matthias Jabs, the result was a powerful love drive from '79. Here they crafted a formula that would skyrocket the band's popularity. Melodic ballads followed by powerful hard rock anthems. Hits like Loving You, Sunday Morning, the ballad Holiday, and the instrumental Coast to Coast brought Scorpions their first real success in the United States. Still, it became clear there wasn't room for three guitarists, and since Rudolph wanted his brother back, Matthias was kicked out. But later, they had to beg him to return because Michael left for good and abandoned them. The rest is history. Michael Schenker went his own way, and with Matthias Jabs back in the lineup, Scorpions delivered their first major '80s hit, Animal Magnetism. Powerhouse tracks like Make It Real, and especially The Zoo, only helped boost Scorpions' fame, setting them up to enter the 80s as a band on the brink of global superstardom. The album cover, just like the one for Love Drive, stirred some controversy, but was artistically acceptable. Plus, the band's image evolved to better fit the emerging style of the early 80s. However, their career nearly hit a dead end when, amidst touring and before recording their next album, Klaus Meine ran into serious throat problems. He had to undergo surgery, put his voice at risk, and during those months of recovery, many doubted he would ever sing again. Fortunately, the man himself made a full recovery, and the band finally soared to worldwide stardom. While Klaus was recovering from his throat surgery, the rest of the band started writing their next album with his blessing. They even reached out to an American singer who was in Germany recording his first records, a then almost unknown vocalist named Don Dokken. That's right, the very same Don Dokken who, just a few years later, would go on to form the glam metal icons Dokken. Dokken's voice could be heard on the backing vocals, but Klaus was able to come back and record all his parts with a flawless voice. The result? Their first massive global breakthrough, the brilliant Blackout. The singles Can't Live Without You and No One Like You became worldwide hits, especially the latter, which became one of the band's key ballads and a classic of 80s heavy metal. In fact, that was their first real music video, which aired on the newly launched MTV and helped spread their fame even further. Scorpions' rising stardom was proven by their appearances at two epic festivals. The first was the Dortmund Festival, where they shared the stage with Ozzy Osbourne, Iron Maiden, Judas Priest, Def Leppard, Krokus, Quiet Riot, and even Michael Schenker, who had formed his own band. But the most important was the 1983 U.S. Festival in California, where they played in front of nearly 400,000 people. Not only did they deliver an epic performance, but it was also broadcast live on MTV, guaranteeing them even more exposure. All this built huge anticipation in the U.S. for the band's next album, and what came next would surpass all expectations. The legendary Love at First Sting from '84. That album became their most successful record to date and firmly established Scorpions as one of the world's most popular bands. The singles Big City Nights, Still Loving You, and especially Rock You Like a Hurricane dominated charts worldwide. The album's massive popularity immediately launched them into a global tour, featuring historic moments like the very first Rock in Rio festival, held in Rio de Janeiro in '85. From that tour came the live album Worldwide Live, which also had a VHS release, showcasing just how brutal and star-powered they were on stage, literally the pinnacle of 80s hard rock and heavy metal. That world tour lasted nearly 3 years, and it wasn't until mid-'87 that they could finally focus on their next chapter. By then, glam metal had taken over the commercial side of rock and metal, with albums like Def Leppard's Hysteria and Whitesnake's self-titled release setting the bar. Scorpions aimed to follow that trend, diving into a more polished commercial sound and aesthetic, and the music showed it. Their '88 album Savage Amusement was a result. Though it's now considered an absolute classic with killer tracks, at the time many fans criticized it for its obvious softness. Still, it was another success that kept their 80s fame going strong. On that tour, the band made their first visit to the Soviet Union, one of the very first Western bands to play there. Thanks to that, Scorpions built a strong following in Russia, which only grew when they took part in the iconic 1989 Moscow Music Peace Festival. There, they played at Luzhniki Stadium alongside acts like Motley Crue, Bon Jovi, Cinderella, Skid Row, Ozzy Osbourne, and local favorites Gorky Park. With that event, Scorpions capped off the most successful decade with a bang and prepared themselves to face the challenges of the emerging 90s. Scorpions' first steps into the 90s were truly successful. After returning from Russia, they began writing their next album. But to do so, they parted ways with longtime producer Dieter Dierks, who had been with them since the mid-'70s and embraced a raw, less polished sound. In November of 1990, the hit album Crazy World was released. Though the heavier tracks were rawer and more unpolished, the album's success mainly came from two ballads, Send Me an Angel, and, above all, Wind of Change. That song was inspired by the socio-political shifts of the time, like the fall of the Berlin Wall and the overall collapse of the Cold War order. In fact, the music video features footage from Scorpion performance at the Wall concert that Roger Waters staged in Berlin that year, where they played in the flesh. The downside? After that, longtime bassist Francis Buchholz decided to lead the band. His replacement was Ralph Riekerman, with whom they recorded their next album, which wouldn't be nearly as successful. The 1993 album Face the Heat. The album had a darker overall sound, but didn't forget the ballads. Still, its performance was fairly modest compared to what they had achieved before. Definitely, the times were changing. But from this record came the killer track, No Pain, No Gain, which became one of the official songs of the 1994 World Cup in the US. So yeah, before recording their next studio album, they released Live Bites, a collection of performances spanning from '88 to '94. This served as a prelude to their 1996 release, Pure Instinct. You and I just have a dream. Before starting the recording sessions for the album, longtime drummer Herman Rarebell left the band, and Cort Cress stepped in temporarily to record it. The result was commercially weak, with only the ballad You and I gaining some traction. After that, James Kodak joined as a permanent drummer, and with him, they embarked on world tours that increasingly focused on Latin America and Asia, as the US market was losing interest. Kodak's first album with the band was the poorly received Eye to Eye from '99. That album is often criticized in Scorpion's discography because it clearly leaned towards pop rock and also incorporated electronic elements that didn't suit them at all. After that failure, the band decided to wipe the slate clean and start the new century with a couple of much better received projects. Scorpions kicked off the 21st century with a symphonic album Moment of Glory, recorded alongside the Berlin Philharmonic Orchestra, featuring 10 of the band's classics reimagined with orchestral arrangements. Then, in 2001, they released their first unplugged album, Acoustica, which also earned positive reviews. However, all this only delayed the release of new material. It would be 3 years before they finally dropped their 15th studio album, Unbreakable, in 2004. Unlike their previous studio albums, this one was fairly well received, marking a return to more traditional hard rock. However, it suffered from poor promotion and fell short commercially. By then, the band core members were already millionaires, so commercial setbacks didn't weigh heavily on them. To prove it, they recorded a live DVD titled One Night in Vienna, captured in the Austrian capital. 3 years later, with the help of songwriter Desmond Child, they released a concept album called Humanity Hour One. The album told a basic story about a war between humanity and robots, musically revisiting some of their classic ballad style. Though the album wasn't a huge commercial success, the band regained some recognition among younger audiences, as several of their classic tracks appeared in popular games like Guitar Hero and Rock Band. A couple of other notable events happened between this and their next album, including a brief controversy after playing at a concert celebrating the anniversary of Russia's KGB, which sparked criticism back home. The band defended themselves, claiming they were misled and told it was a Christmas concert. I don't know, Rick? But anyway, in 2010, they released the album they intended to be their farewell record, Sting in the Tail. This album featured the hit song Good Day to Die Young, which included a guest appearance by former Nightwish vocalist Tarja Turunen, a collaboration that boosted its reach even further. Although they initially announced that they would stop recording albums after that tour, they soon changed their minds. That said, they drastically slowed down after this, releasing only 2 more albums in the next 15 years, which I'll talk about next. We've reached a new decade in their musical journey, and Scorpions kicked it off in 2011 with a re-recordings album called Come Black. Honestly, it's not that great in my opinion, better to stick with the original versions of those classics. But then they recorded another acoustic album in Athens, Greece, which was released on DVD in 2013 as MTV Unplugged in Athens. The following year, with their 50th anniversary approaching, they finally announced they would release a new studio album to mark the milestone. And indeed, in 2015, their penultimate album returned to Forever arrived. This album stayed true to the band's classic sound, although the songs didn't make a huge impact, as most fans focused more on the remastered versions of their iconic albums released that same year. Also, in 2016, after filling in for drummer James Kodak on several dates, the legendary Mikkey Dee, freshly departed from Motorhead following Lemmy's death, was announced as an official member of the band. His arrival brought a fresh burst of energy and power, which became fully evident during this final era of Scorpions. In early 2020, Scorpions began writing a new album in Los Angeles. Although they tried working remotely during the pandemic lockdowns, they ended up waiting several months and only resumed full efforts by late 2021. Weeks before its release, they revealed the album's name and cover art. And honestly, folks, while they say you shouldn't judge a book by its cover, the moment I saw that artwork, I knew this was going to be a killer album. And I wasn't wrong. Their latest record, Rock Believer, dropped in 2022 to rave reviews.
Let's play it louder, play it hard, lean back.
The album cover was designed by the legendary German designer and musician Klaus Voormann, best known for creating the iconic cover of the Beatles' Revolver and for supporting George Harrison, John Lennon, and Ringo Starr as a session musician during the 70s. But back to Rock Believer. This beast of an album injected the adrenaline and power of the 80s right into their veins. Maybe it was the massive presence of Mikkey Dee, but they sounded like Blackout or Love at First Sting, and that's saying a lot for a veteran band already in their 70s. The reception was solid, and the band set off on a world tour that was supposed to include appearances at the Monsters of Rock festivals across Latin America. Unfortunately, after their 2025 show in Chile, Klaus caught a virus, and Scorpions had to pull out the remaining dates. Then after Europe set, or was it after Opeth, they officially announced they wouldn't be performing. Haha, but hey, that's how it went down. Since 2025 marks their 60th anniversary, on July 5th, they planned a special concert at the Hanover Stadium, featuring legends Judas Priest and Alice Cooper. But on that very same day, Black Sabbath's farewell show took place, and honestly, their event barely made a ripple. That's exactly why I made this video, to honor their 6 decades of existence in my own way. And here's where I ask you, what's your favorite Scorpions song and album? Have you listened to their latest record? What did you think of it? Drop all your answers in the comments as soon as the video ends. And there you have it, metalheads. That's how this long journey through the story of another legendary hard rock and heavy metal band ends. A band that hugely shaped our genre and helped popularize it through the 70s and 80s. It really hits hard when a band this iconic reaches 60 years of musical legacy. And that's why I had to make this video no matter what. But hey, you know the drill. Drop your thoughts down in the comments box. I'll be reading them all.
Stay heavy, stay loud, and I'll see you in Keep Metal.